Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where we're going to be talking about delving into an old base. We're going to talk about a construct maker, but we're going to be talking about this idea of our environment and the inspiration it has on us here on Rise of the GM. All right, well, everybody, it's good to be back with you again. Today, we are going to be hitting kind of the third in our inspiration series, right? So we started off with books and kind of, I guess, movies, but books especially that inspire us. And then last week, we talked about people that have inspired us and what that looked like. And today, we're going to be talking a little bit, and we don't know exactly how this is going to even go, but we're going to be talking a little bit about the places that inspire us. So we're going to do that, and we're going to obviously hit our haversack of questions at the end and see if we can answer those to the best of our ability. But as always, we're going to start with a random encounter to drop into your campaign. Adam, why don't you talk to us a little bit about this random encounter, and we'll hit that.
For sure. Yeah, hope everybody's doing well today. Thanks for listening. This is called Delving the Old Base. Delving the Old Base from Eureka. It says this. While traveling along a coastal road, the PCs notice a large ship headed toward their destination, a large town that's up ahead. Seeing no sails or means of mechanical propulsion, they conclude that it's likely powered by strong magic. Sometime after the PCs arrive, they discover that the ship is docked and trading with the townspeople. There are several oddities regarding the transactions that pique the attentions of the PCs. The traders are buying very little food. None of the townspeople are allowed to carry their goods onto the ship. And a few friendly crew members carouse in the bars and express relief at being on the mainland and having, quote, real people to talk to. Upon interacting with the crew members, the PCs are invited on board and discover the reason for the curious behavior. The rest of the crew members are non-organics, such as golems, elementals, or constructs. The captain is a very powerful wizard who offers the PCs pay and passage anywhere they like if they raid an old military base to acquire an artifact for him. He explains somewhat begrudgingly that the mission requires more creativity and quick thinking than his crew can provide. The journey to the old base takes some time, and the PCs have plenty of opportunities to interact with the non-organics. They're single-minded in their tasks and literal in their speech. The PCs find that the captain is uncooperative and unfriendly. His aloofness may suggest ill intentions to the PCs, but it is, in fact, simply due to his preference for non-organic company. Once they arrive, the PCs encounter an array of obstacles, things like odorless flammable gases from alchemical workspaces, flooded corridors, broken magical lifts and stairways, magic traps, and enemy non-organics. Along the way, they find clues suggesting that the artifact is hidden on the lowest level. To reach it, the PCs must overcome a slew of non-organics. The creatures fight as if their lives depend on protecting the artifact, which they do, since it acts as their power source. The artifact is actually a cage for a living magical being. Tapped for its life force and in constant pain, the being gives off tremendous amounts of energy. It begs the PCs for death, which is its only chance for release. The PCs are thus faced with a moral choice. They must either kill the creature, betraying their mission and losing their pay, or inform the captain of the situation, leaving the creature in agony. If the PCs choose the latter, they may be surprised to learn that the captain is appalled by the nature of this magic and wants the PCs to return and release the poor creature. He's still happy to provide payment in full, and we can use this plot to shake up PCs who are used to being double-crossed by employers or are mistrustful of NPCs. So delving the old base.
There you go. Well, this is an interesting one. I like the idea of this for what they said right there at the end. You're traveling on this ship if you decide to take this job with this guy who his aloofness may make you think he has ill intent for you, and I would probably kind of lean into the role playing of that a bit so that they begin to question, and then they come to this place where they find this cage and they're kind of presented with this moral dilemma. But I would not tell them that this is a moral dilemma, because
Yeah.
any PC who is like, oh, if this is a moral dilemma, I will choose the high road, and I will do, and so I would just kind of throw out the situation and then let them decide. But I do like this idea that if they, in fact, go back to the captain, he's going to be just disgusted by this form of magic and encourage them to do whatever it takes to free them. Now, what I like though is that the freedom is death. That's the only freedom this thing can think of, unless your characters get like all bent out of shape and they go on this like campaign changing job to find a way to free this thing without killing it. The only way to kill it the only way to free it is to kill it, which and it presents its own sort of moral, because I would make it like something that was like horrific to experience, not just like we say the word and you just disappear silently and you're out of your pain. I would make this something that that was a trial for them to go through, even if the captain's like, oh, this is horrible, release it, in whatever way that takes. Well, then they have to decide what that's going to look like. So it's kind of neat in that aspect, because I do think typically we make our NPCs, so many of these NPCs that we have, as a matter of fact, when we get to our NPC later, they always add this little hook. It's like, and this is like how he's going to end up being like this villain. And you always have these PCs that are intent on evil and then doing bad things in the world and looking for power in that. So having one that kind of twists that, so that our people just don't get this constantly used to this idea that the NPCs are bad. I think that's good. That's a good encounter to put in there.
Yeah, I definitely like the twists there, of both. You have someone who like seems kind of nefarious, but it isn't, and actually is the one that's going to be like, no, like you should deal with this. This is not right, kind of thing. That being the twist on it, of like subverting the expectations, but also just the end. I mean, like, so they basically give us like a dungeon crawl. It's not like super laid out, but you're going through all these traps and environmental situations where it's like you have to jump over the alchemical acid pool and go through the gases and fight off the constructs and all these different things. And you're that often, at least in games I feel like I've run, there's typically you're building up to a head where it's like, all right, and now that we're all beat up, we've used all our resources, now it's time to fight the big one, kind of thing. And you get there and it's like, no, this actually is like a creature in pain, and maybe we're going to attack it, but it's not fighting back. It wants to have release, kind of deal. So I think that's an interesting twist too, of just like what's going on in people's brains, with that. And I like that idea of like trying to, I want to think on that about like, okay, what would that look like? Obviously you don't want to do that every single dungeon. You don't want to ever do the exact same thing over and over and over again, but I like that it's twisted in a good, like there's a twist in that too. So that's good.
Yeah. This reminds me a lot of, I ran in my Dormant Mind campaign, I ran this one scenario where these people were to go down into basically this huge, this ginormous, I'm trying to think of a better word.
Thing's huge.
Just huge. I think it's huge, man. There's this huge worm that had petrified, the purple worm. They were looking for what was called the heart of the purple worm, because that was where it came from, its power stone. But anyway, they had to first climb this thing while there were I forget what it was, some kind of monster up at the top throwing.
It was a dragon.
Well, there were some throwing rocks down initially as you were trying to climb up. They were just smashing the ladders and the bridges that you were climbing up this tall structure. But then once you got in the structure, it not only went down to ground level, but it went down even further. And all the way down, you had to fight magical traps, and you had to fight alchemical things, and you had to there were booby trap bridges that dropped you into lakes with huge monsters and all this kind of stuff. And so it's cool in that it just kind of gives you like the broad outlines of some things that you could put in here, and then you'd have to find puzzle traps, you'd have to find alchemical hazards and think,
Yeah.
how is this going to be in this room where they can't get out, just run through it or whatever. How am I going to make it difficult? So you got all that, which I like. And it made me think of that. But then if I were running this, when I get to the bottom, I would make that cage, obviously not like a bird cage, but some sort of amulet or some sort of box or something that is cool looking in some way. And I would try to find a cool picture of whatever that could be, because that would make that stick in people's memory
Right.
longer. And of course, there would be they would have to figure out, if they decide to kill this, how do you kill something in that amulet or in that
Right.
box? Again, I think that could be part of it. And if they get crazy and just decide that their mission in this world now is to learn to free this thing, and then later, if they do, 3 levels down the campaign trail, that thing in its gratitude, then what becomes
Yeah.
an ally, becomes someone who gives them deep secrets of the universe that lead them to something else. There's like possibilities for that.
Right.
So I wouldn't just dismiss this as okay, kill it or take it back to the captain, and then he says to kill it, and then you figure out how, because that really comes down to the same choice. Do they kill it or take it back to the captain? Oh, if they take it back to the captain and they kill it, that could be an end. And maybe that's all you want to do. You just want to figure a way to like put this thing out of its misery. But I would challenge you GMs, you ascending GMs, to take it one step further and give their an option, if they decide that they want to do the higher moral thing of not killing it, but finding a way. And then, they also have to balance the time. Let's say you have this thing, it's like in constant pain. Yeah, obviously it's not going to die. Otherwise you could just leave it alone and it would die. But it's in this constant pain, and you could even hook some sort of, the longer it's in pain, the more this happens in the world, whatever that is. Maybe there could be a greater thing about like all constructs and golems maybe get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be funny if this was the thing that powered like all constructs? You kill this and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
constructs in the world
Everything
die.
just.
That'd be bad. That could be bad for the world at large. But anyway, yeah, interesting scenario. Any other thoughts on that before we move to our other topics?
Yeah. I think that last thing you said could get real interesting if you have somebody who's playing a non-organic, kind of thing. Like I'm thinking about like, well, I just lost there's, races that are more like construct oriented, and that kind of question of like, okay, what if this, like, what does that mean for me if this thing is powering stuff like me, and I think that can be really interesting. The one thing that kind of spun out of what you were saying, it's not really about this, but I just more and more am really content with things that perpetuate the story,
Right.
even if it's not what I'm like envisioning, and we've talked about that not having like the so strong of rails that like you have to stay within the bumpers, kind of thing. It's like, if I would welcome that so much if people are like, no, we're going to find the way to like fix this. The problem with that though is this thing is like tormented. So while I'm off adventuring for 2 years looking for a key to, it's like that gets a little difficult. But I would love that as like a GM of like, yeah, like go for that. If that's what you all are like passionate about in this game at this point, go for that. And that can be this arc that takes place. And I may have an idea about what's going on over here, and that can tie into it, or maybe that's going to come back, eventually, or it totally adjusts and we're like, oh, I had this idea. I guess that's gone, kind of thing. And we're moving.
What would be cool? Just thinking about like, okay, this thing's going to be in pain for however long while we're trying to find this. What would be cool for me as a GM would be to build in a mechanic that, okay, you guys take this on, and as long as you have this with you, or even if they stash it somewhere, I think I might do this. Just say the entire time you're trying to do this, it's bonded kind of with you in purpose. And therefore, every night when you go to sleep to gain all of your stuff back, there is a 20% chance that your dreams are so tormented by the pain that this thing is in that you get no rest and you get no health back. You get no magic spells back. You get nothing back in this rest. And I would roll for it each time.
Rough.
And then, it wouldn't be so bad if they're like, oh, we've got a month. Okay, well, we'll just rest tomorrow night and I'm sure it'll work then. But like if they're in a pinch where it's like, man, I'm really hurt and we need to rest before we leave or before we attack this thing. And then, that thing's coming and they roll it, they roll that 20% and then they have to somehow make do. I don't know, that might be harsh, but it might be fun because I'm the GM who likes to be harsh. So
I think that's interesting. And even like playing with those mechanics of, it kind of depends on the system, but we're thinking about like exhaustion or just the fact that you're not getting that valuable health, points back and what that looks like. So
maybe exhaustion is the way to do it. They get some health back, but they're also like one step into exhaustion always because they never rest like completely peacefully because this thing is in their mind and in their soul a little bit. And then when it comes out, I would also make some sort of boon that comes with that. I'm not totally a mean GM. Always. Well, let's move on to our main topic for the day. Unless you had something else, you had your hand going there.
I was just gonna make a comment. It's been a bit, but this is the first time in a while that I've had the train situation like massively. I think it's going like 2 miles an hour, so it may be here for a bit. So, so sorry
for those of you new to the podcast. Adam, as we live stream this, always has a train. Well, he has a very active train near where he is, and so sometimes you get to hear that, and that's part of the beauty and the fun of the live stream, right? So.
Yeah, one of these times we're gonna do something maybe that's like train related, and it'll be like that'll be the day there's perfect. There's nothing actually there.
Nothing.
It's like this could be the thing. So maybe this will come into our conversation today. So sorry about that. But so way back when, I think I mentioned last week, as far as I did Caleb and Ross, I mentioned from RPPR being like, there's a certain influence that they have on me about being like not so nice to players and like being okay with, it's not really about niceness. It's about like
obstacles, challenges,
the challenge being higher and not feeling like I have to, hold my punches, pull my punches. But so I did mention them, and they do a podcast. It's still, but it's been going for a while, talking about gaming and different things. And one of the things that they talked about when I was listening to them like pretty frequently is this. It was titled "LARPing Quietly in My Head" was the name of the podcast episode that they did. And this is a while ago. I should have it pulled up. I don't, but it was like 2015, I think maybe is when they recorded this. So this has been a bit, if you happen to go looking for that, but that idea has stuck with me for some time. And what they were getting at in their conversation was, like when you are in places just out in life, specifically, there'd be times where things would come up and talking about like the environment you're in, like the architecture or just like the situation. I think that could even move into like, I just had this interaction with this person and, art imitating life, that was really intriguing to be in that. And that person not that person, but a person like that may end up in my game kind of thing. And that was kind of the idea that they were talking through. And I didn't necessarily want to comment on like their stuff, but that was kind of where this thought process came from, is like when we're in these different places, just in regular life, the way that maybe that influences things in the game. And for us, or it's like, oh, I'm going to take some inspiration from this situation that I've been in, or this building that I see, or that kind of thing. So just kind of wanted to open that up a little bit and talk about maybe how that has come into play for us. But also maybe some ways that we can just kind of keep our eyes and minds open, as we're kind of going about our daily life. So I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that, Matthew, as we get into it?
I like the sentence. I don't know if you came up with it or if they came up with it, but the idea, I'm always silently LARPing in my head.
Yeah, that was them. That was them for sure.
And
So
as a GM, that's true. I don't care where you go or what you see or what you encounter. There's this part of your brain that's always like, "Oh man, this could be part of a game right here. Oh man, if I were in a game, you know what I would do with this right here." And so I think that for me, so I think when we were talking about it, you're like, "Oh yeah, if you go to the dentist and you're sitting there, while you're sitting there, you start thinking, man, if this were a game, I could be like." I rarely do that with like architecture of very mundane places like a dentist office or anywhere,
right.
because most of the games I play are more fantasy driven, and things are generally on a more epic scale.
Right.
And so for me, this happens in one of two ways typically. The first way is if I'm traveling, and I know so many people who are like, if I had all the money in the world, I would travel a lot. And I do see the draw to that, because when you travel, you see things that are of a scale kind of epically different than your normal life.
Yeah.
When we went on our honeymoon, my wife and I, we went to different islands. We went on a cruise, which is where we would never call ourselves cruise people, but we got a really, really good deal on a cruise, and we decided to do a 7-day cruise, and we got to have some experiences and see some mountains on these islands, and see some scenes on these islands that definitely, when I look at them, the first thing I think is, man, this is something that could be in a game. So that's one place where not just honeymoons for all of you
Yeah.
who are like, well, I'm not married yet, or I only get one chance. It's not just that. It's anytime you travel, anytime you go outside of your region, I think you see things with fresh eyes. The second place this always happens for me is, and it's so much easier now than when I first started, but like I used to, when I would get ready to run a campaign, the way I would start before I started anything, before I even started with my idea of what's the big bad, what's his plan, before
Yeah.
any of that, I would sit down and I would just scroll like amazing places in the world
Yeah.
and cool fantasy art, because I would just like let those inspirations of places begin to build places I thought we might end up in my world, and then from that it would inevitably lead me on some sort of like rough idea
Yeah.
that wasn't too much on the rails, but like at some point they're going to end up on this in this mountain cathedral that's completely made of ice, and what would happen there, or at some point they're going to end up in this kind of place, and what would happen there. And like I said, not just fantasy art, which I will say our world and now with computer generated AI, like the way you can you don't have to wait for someone to actually paint something anymore. Now you can say, show me what it would look like to be at the top of a single spire with, a monk. Um, I can't even think of what would you call the abode, a monastery at the
Yeah.
top of
Yeah.
a
Sure.
spire that's 1,000 feet high, with clouds all around. You just say that, and AI can paint that for you now, and you can like really get a good visual sense of that and use it in your game, because we have hit that point. But I forget where I was going with that, but not just the fantasy art, which we do live in a world where now you can get any kind of fantasy art, but like really spend some time when you're beginning to start a campaign is the best time, I think, but you can do it all through. Spend some time like just kind of looking through some of the wonders of our world, some of the epic wonders of our world, and just cool photography. I can tell you that in our game, I know that some of the points that were probably most memorable for some of our players came from just such excursions into photography. So I think we've talked on here before, and whenever I talk to our group about like a memorable moment in the Dormant Mind, one that always comes up is the gondola scene.
Yeah.
And the gondola scene came from two real life, just looking through like real life things. One of them is this place that's a desert just full of spires that are up high. And that's inspired a couple different encounters. One where there were these birds trying to knock people off of
Oh yeah.
these,
Yeah.
and one where the gondolas, because when I saw these spires, shortly, a few pictures later, I also saw these in the Swiss Alps, these gondolas that would go up to these high peaks, travel these little cars, and those cables. And I saw those cables strung like between several peaks. And I'm like, ooh, what if you lived in this place that was all spires of different sizes, and down below was like either like a bottomless pit of nothingness, or it was so far down there that people just traveled by these cables all around. And I'm like, ooh, what would that be like? And so the silent LARPing in my head kicked in, and that became the place that had all these cables that connected, and everybody had these little towels that were magic. And when you put them on these lines, they would zip you along these lines. You guys had some of those, but there were also these gondola cars. And so you guys were on one of these gondolas when an attack came, people zipping to this place, and you guys all having to figure out how to defend. I forget, was that Amira in there? Defend this person in there. And, at the same time, they were trying to take what ended up being one of these stones of power that you guys ended up getting, the Wrath Stone. And there was a whole story about that. But that was a very, an encounter that very much came out of seeing gondolas with their cables, and then seeing these spires like kind of right next to each other in this kind of thing. And so there are so many really kind of cool encounters that come from looking at some of the kind of wonders of the world with eyes of what would I do if. There was one you guys had an arch where you all ended up being tied up and at the mercy of some great magician. Well, that arch was kind of one of these Old West Canyon arches of stone. That was the picture I saw. And I thought, ooh, what if like that arch itself was actually like a portal? And when you went through it, you didn't go just to the other side, you teleported to somewhere. And that became the whole thing. And of course I put it at the top of this mountain, and you guys had to get up there and all of that. But that's one. I've had one in the past where I saw a picture of an old lighthouse that was so far out in the water that it almost looked like it was floating, and it had lots of stuff around it. And I actually didn't use that one with you guys to its fullest. I talked about a lighthouse as you guys left Idrisel, but in my mind, I was going to do a lot more with that. That may come up in another campaign. But just these pictures of places, real places. I saw an old shack in a swamp with boardwalks leading up to it, long boardwalks. And I'm like, ooh. And then of course my wife's father, he was a director of parks in northern Indiana, and he began making this place. My wife, who was a landscape architecture student, actually designed all of these boardwalks of this place in Pine Knob, and they actually made a place off of that was a fen, and it's now called Mike's Fen, or the Mike Metz Fen. Her dad's name, Mike Metz. And this fen is just basically all these long boardwalks walking through this like kind of swampy area. And I'm like, ooh, what I could do something with that. That would be cool, because if the swamp wasn't just a swamp, but it was actually something that would, acidic or something. And they get out and they're going to this place out in the middle, this old shack that I see that could be a hag's house, let's say. And then somehow all of these boardwalks start burning, and then they have to figure out how to get, well, you guys know that was, well, that was an encounter that I did. And it came from seeing a picture of a house, just this old rundown house in a swamp, and then seeing all of these boardwalks at this fen. And so again, there's this mashup. This is kind of I'm beginning to realize through this podcast that my personality is rip real things apart and stitch them together like Frankenstein. So I think I've determined that I am Frankenstein, Dr.
Frankenstein.
Because it was the monster of Dr. Frankenstein, right? Frankenstein wasn't the monster. So that's me. And there's more and more examples. I was kind of jotting down some here, but maybe, I don't know if this is kind of taken it way off the path of where you were thinking when we initially talked about this topic, but I want to give you a chance to talk to you, because I do this. I vomit words forever.
It's all good. I think that's definitely within the vein of this. And the thing I feel like we both have said that keeps coming up is like entering into these things with just like the thought of like, eyes open. What could I do with this kind of thing? And obviously there's times, I feel like a disclaimer of like, pay attention to the here and now. Like there's times where maybe we don't need to be fantasizing about that, but but I think gathering inspiration and just like having these elements that are at our disposal, it's like super important to just kind of be observers of what's going on. And yeah, I think that like, whether it's, my like Instagram is full of just like beautiful places and fantastic places, or like artists that do landscapes and things. And it's not even necessarily RPG related or fantasy related. It's just like trying to get inspiration. Man, that's like a beautiful place, like save that. I want to come back to that later, those kind of things. So I definitely feel that, like the things you're talking about with that. I kind of have it kind of depends on the RPG for me. Like I've noticed, I think a lot about, and we're going to eventually get here, but we're going to talk red markets one of these days, kind of thing, a little more in depth about like how the game functions. But that's post-apocalyptic, the zombie kind of situation. And I feel like that's the thing I note the most, particularly when I'm driving around my city, which I don't know what that says, but like there's things where I'm like,
what am I
driving
city?
through, but there's certain, parts where I'm like, oh, that's like a warehouse, this like warehouse, or, this, this building that like at one time was a store, but now it's kind of boarded up. And those things, a lot of times I think like get into my brain as far as when I've run red markets games, I'm drawing a lot off of things I've noticed, even just my day-to-day, like driving around. Even with that, it's like sometimes even people like in that game, again, I'm veering too much, but like there's these like taker groups and people who are just trying to survive, and even like having inspiration. I've had inspiration come from real life and in that realm too, of like, oh, like the dude who's got the bicycle full of baskets of stuff, who somehow is also towing like 3 dogs on leashes behind him with the giant backpack. It's like, that's like, wow, like I don't know what's going on there anyway. Like that's super interesting. But then like that could be somebody here that you run into in that game, who would be like a really interesting character to meet. For some reason, like schools are really inspiring for me when I'm thinking about like dungeons or things like that. Like, I don't know why.
Again, what does this say about your experience with schools?
Yeah, it's like, and like, why am I, in schools anyway? But or even like buildings like on our campus, I think it's just particularly if you're ever in a place like a school, like a big building, maybe like a conference hall or like a church or something like that, when there's like not a bunch of people there's something about like those spaces that's like strange when it's not full of the people that those buildings are made for, kind of thing. And I think that has been an influence for me in some of that, of like, okay, what about these like huge cathedrals, but they're abandoned, or, that kind of stuff has played a big role, I think, in when I'm like, yeah, I could see this being in a game, kind of deal. But then that like real life, you're talking about the Fen, like Mike's Fen. There's a specific cave, which actually this weekend I'm going to probably go through again, on a trip, but it's in like central Indiana. And a lot of times if I need a quick underground thing in the moment, I'm often thinking of this cave because I've been through it enough times, and I'm like, yeah, like there's this tunnel that you can kind of like walk through, but then it gets shallower and you kind of have to get down in a crouching position for a while, but then it pops back out into this like large room, and there's some tunnels that go off up here and through here, and there's a hallway. And like, I know it by feel well enough now, because it's been like, a dozen times I've been through this cave, and I've used it in games enough that it's like, that's a super easy draw. So I think there's some things like that sometimes that if we keep our eyes open and kind of like, yeah, I'm going to like meet this stuff as an observer, not just a person who uh, drifts through these situations and doesn't really pay any attention. I think that can be like a really, really huge help. So, yeah.
And I think it's always that, again, keep that idea silently LARPing in my head as you see anything. You're driving and you see schools or you see towns, but whatever you see, if you always kind of have that game running in the back of your head. Now, again, Adam had a good point. Sometimes you want to turn off the game thoughts enough to be in the moment, but that doesn't mean you can't like take a little note and like come back to it later. So I was getting ready to run an encounter with a bunch of woodcutters, and I happened to be watching something about one of the largest clocks in the world, and they had this huge swinging pendulum that was going back and forth. And I was sitting there thinking, man, what if the edges of that were like so sharp that like they would cut people just by touching them, and I'm like, ooh, what if there was a big axe that was hung in this warehouse and barrels along each side that were like roped up, and like they walked into an ambush where these barrels, they're cutting the strings and the barrels are like toppling down on them. But then at the same time, there's this one big thing swinging back and forth in the middle of the battle that is magically will cut anything. I don't care what it is, metal or, and that became an encounter that we did. I saw a whole bunch of hanging bird cages in a picture. I don't even remember what it was for. As we were getting ready to go into a part of our campaign where they had to rescue someone from jail. And I'm like, ooh, what if they actually did that with people, hung them up high in these cages? And then of course that became part of that campaign. The things you see in life, always be thinking this kind of juxtaposition. How can I take whatever I'm seeing and whatever we're getting ready to go into and mash them together? It's like the king of, what was that show? I never watched it much, about the singers, Glee. They're always doing mashups, right? That's all I remember. It's like, oh, we're gonna mash up two songs. That's what you do. You're mashing up what you see in reality with what you know is coming in your game, and do that in such a way that you're allowing for something new and different than you even expected. Because here's what I would say is, it's easy to fall into this trap of every time you get together with your players, here's a square room on a map with squares, and you're going to fight. Well, okay. Fighting is fun. Rolling dice is fun. But take that same temple that you were going to make, that was just a square that they walked into, and think of some like crazy location. I always am trying to think of like, what would make this like way more memorable. Okay, let's put it at the top of an active volcano, and there's holes and there's lava below, or put this they're dropped into the largest hole in the world, and they've got to fight while they fall because someone has put a teleportation place on the bottom and on the top, and basically they're just going to continue to teleport between these two places until one of them wins. And what that'd be like to have like a battle while you're falling with nothing to anchor off of. Your swings are less effective. What's going to happen? You're in here. I don't know. I've not really done that one, but that seems like it'd be cool. I saw a picture of like just under the ocean thing with just jellyfish everywhere, and it made me think about a time. Or here's one. Looking at the Stonehenge ring and thinking, oh, what if every one of those things were a teleportation to a different moon? And I did a campaign where it was called the I forget what it's called, Blood of Kings. Basically, I wanted every world to be so completely different because I wanted to allow for totally memorable sorts of battles and thoughts and ideas. And I'm like, instead of having them travel all over the continent to get to some place that's like a completely different sort of climate or completely different sort of place, what if they had these teleportation rings, all like this circle of them, and each one would take them to a different moon, and each moon had its own, and so we did that. And so anyway, one of them led to this place that was like full of stinging jellyfish as soon as they went into it. I think that was on that campaign. It's been so long. But I think another one I had was seeing these people and doing this myself, but not in the same place. So I had been kayaking and canoeing, and we came up between some places that were kind of high on each side. But then I saw this documentary of these people who were was it the Rio Grande? Maybe it was in the Grand Canyon. Anyway, they were kayaking, just these high sheer cliffs on each side. And as they were showing this documentary, I could see like there were some holes in the like caves up high. I'm like, ooh, man, what if they were doing that? And all of a sudden, these Aarakocra starts coming out. These like fighting
Yeah.
Aarakocra. Obviously, they're not going to do that in the real Grand Canyon. There's no such thing as Aarakocra. But in my
What?
imagination, you're going and you say
Yeah.
you're going for hours and hours, and you're just kind of at the
Mm,
mercy of the current in this boat because you can't just turn around and go out of it that
yeah.
way, the
Right.
way you came, and you have no idea how far it's going to be before you get out of it down this way. And all of a sudden, you start seeing these like caves on each side, and like as you're going by, you trip the notice of these things and they start coming out. And at first it's like fight them as they come out. And then pretty soon they're everywhere, circling in the sky, and you've got to continue fighting them and
Yeah.
fighting them. And so those kinds of thoughts, silently LARPing in my head all the
Yeah.
time when I see documentaries, when I see pictures, when I see places I'm driving or
Right.
flying or visiting.
Yeah. Something I'm thinking about. Well, one, and you brought this up. I think it's like the best advice is that what if advice that you brought up like several episodes ago. But I feel like that keeps coming up of anytime we step into these things, whether it's like seeing a picture or being in the dentist's office, or like going down this river or reading a book, or hearing an idea. It's like the what if kind of thing definitely can spin that creativity. So my encouragement for ascending GMs out there is like to be asking, I'm stealing Matthew's tip, but like to ask that what if thing, when you're in just different situations that may not be the normal or your normal situations. But a thing I'm finding as I'm like thinking through this is I think the LARPing quietly in my head idea, or just like the tucking away environments that I've been in or have seen, actually comes out for me in the improv spots
Mm.
where it's like I need something because they've went somewhere I wasn't expecting. And so now I'm thinking of like a place like I don't know. Red markets keeps coming up for me in this, and I don't know. I think it's because that's more like what we're in. But I remember specifically being in a game where the specific encounter, the leg of that one of the legs that they were on of the trip, there was supposed to just I can't remember if you were playing in this game, Matthew, or if it was maybe somebody else, but there was supposed to be kind of just a warning to these taker groups, like we're coming for you kind of thing. And that's all it was supposed to be. There wasn't supposed to be like actually any action that takes place. It was just
We're
basically a
talking about this
sign.
fence.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then there
yeah,
was
yeah,
yes, I was
yeah.
in that one.
So there that was the way it had been planned, and that was a leg from the book. Like even it's just that's there. They're supposed to engage with and be like, oh shoot, there's more stuff going on, and there's somebody out there killing us, so we need to watch out. But everybody got super excited about the like. I think even I feel if I remember the moment correctly, it's like, well, what's this fence around? And I'm like, an old factory. It's like there's something going on in that factory. So everybody wanted to go in the
We got to
factory.
go in there now.
And I'm like, oh shoot, like this is turning into something when it wasn't supposed to. They were supposed to just keep going. But I'm not even that game's a little more like there's this thing that happens, then this thing that happens, and this thing. There's not as much like I'm gonna run across the world to a completely different thing. That's kind of how the jobs work. But even in that, I was like, I'm not just gonna like railroad everybody like, oh, you can't get in, go, keep moving. And so you all went in the factory, and there were, the whole situation of, okay, we're going to see if there's any zombies there. We're going to unlock the door. We're going to check the roof, like all this stuff. But as you guys came in, I'm like, well, what is this? I don't want to just be like, oh, you see a big room. And my father-in-law works with like chrome plating and different kind of platings. And I remember going to visit his work before and was just like, this place is like super cool from a like a unique standpoint of like there's like vats of chemicals and like pools of stuff where they have to dip these things. And what ended up happening there was I was like,
I need something
this factory, this chrome plating place. And that made some cool things, because it's like, well, what if like one of these zombies half fell into one of these chrome vats, again, we're suspending some disbelief here, but like, and then got up and it's like covered in metal part of its body. You can't do a headshot on this thing because it's, like, what does that look like? And so that even, that was all like unplanned, but it's like, I grabbed that place that I knew and I thought was unique in real life. And it turned into like a pretty cool scenario, where people, I think, were engaged with it. So that's what I'm finding more is even, I don't think I like typically am like, oh man, that's a really cool, like, piece of this forest that I'm walking through. I'm going to like put that in Thursday's game. It tends to like kind of come out of me more, because I think it's just because I'm trying to observe and like tuck those things away. So that's an encouragement just to do that, for you all, is just pay attention. And if there's something that's interesting, kind of slip that in the back of your mind, like, oh, maybe this could come out in some way later.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a very fun one, because somebody kept like rolling ones and like, it's not ones. It's not ones in red markers, but they kept failing somehow.
Double odds. Yeah. Double odds.
And it was like funny every time. It became a big part of the story. Can't even remember what it was now. It's a big part of the story, but I do remember it. If somebody sparked it, I'd be right back. All right. So that's inspiration from environments. And I think that's a good place to leave that, is always be tucking it away, always be filing it away, and then always be asking what if. When you're in the middle of a game and somebody like wants to do something, that's when that'll kind of come forward, and then let yourself be open to, well, what if? What if we did this? And sometimes that will make the encounter that was so much more exciting than anything you had planned for the night. And it really comes out as one that they remember forever. And that's what it's really about, making good stories that we all remember together, and we can go back and remember those. Well, hey, let's jump into our NPC here, and then we'll have some Haversack questions at the end. Our NPC this time is a guy named Colin Kern. He is a political construct maker. And you're like, what the heck does that mean? Political and construct maker? Well, you just stick around. I'm going to tell you. So this is a guy who's strong and commanding, dressed in expertly tailored clothes. His only visible flaws are a slight limp and unusually heavy kind of tread as he walks. They're just giving him some kind of background and appearance here. Role playing, Colin speaks in an authoritarian voice and uses his size to remind others that he is in charge. In his arrogance, he talks over other people and is visibly surprised when anyone offers dissent to what he's saying. He's extremely intelligent, smugly superior, used to being surrounded by toadies and constructs. Therefore, he kind of expects to be obeyed. He finds intellectual challenge, particularly in the workshop, irresistible. Right? He holds little regard for anything or anyone, especially the unwashed masses, those people out there. When faced with opposition, he relies on his position, his power, and his wealth to cow anybody who opposes him. And if that approach fails, his minions are always available to show out unwanted visitors. So basically, he has no patience for anyone if they're not kind of involved in the particular puzzle that he is working on right now. His motivation, he's already a member of the ruling caste. He already commands exorbitant resources. And so now he is seeking political power, things that can help him to advance the crafting of constructs that he is all about. Background, he holds a powerful political office, and the constructs that he's designed, although expensive, are widely used among the wealthy as guards, as servants, those sorts of things, making his product indispensable and pervasive in this place where he lives, and maybe the regions around that. You see evidence of his work everywhere. And then they throw this line at the end. Like I said, they always give you an opportunity to make them villains, right? He solidifies his political hold. When the moment is right, his golems will rise at his command and make him a major power. Okay, so that's like if he were evil. I don't always necessarily want to like play those things out. But I like this. And so like when you're thinking of this guy, he can be like, machines aren't always perfect. But unlike society, machines can be repaired. He's brusque, he's big, and he definitely is more about like his constructs and the being able to know what to expect from them
Yeah,
that he
yeah.
likes. And so here's this guy, and I like kind of who this character is as one that's just there to kind of further the plot along, not necessarily to become this bad guy, although you can keep that line at the end in there and be like, okay, this guy, he's going to be have little time for the PCs. He's basically about trying to increase his political power. And then maybe if you want to later, he can turn into something that has that seed of evil that then, cause all of his constructs and
Yeah.
golems that are in all of these rich people's houses everywhere to basically make him, the major power. They take over and whatever that looks like.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I going with, well, one, so there was not a plan here in this, like when these topics were put together.
Right.
I find this interesting because you have the ship full of constructs, and you have the whole thing with like the magic creature that's like powering constructs, and then you have this construct major. That was not purposeful, just to be clear on this. Like these things just happen to both get picked, and I find that even like that super interesting to tie some of this together, of these things.
I agree. I have to say, I thought after I was reading these two, which again, randomly picked for today, we randomly kind of picked these. And as I was reading, I'm like, oh, I could kind of marry those two together.
Yeah,
somehow.
I think that could be a really interesting arc, like to go with that. Particularly like, okay, so let's say we'll go back to our encounter and the idea that we had where it's like, all right, we're taking plan C, which is we want to save this thing. Who do you need to go talk to? Maybe a construct maker who's getting really good at this craft may have something to do with the way that this energy is working. I don't bringing them
in. Maybe he's highly opposed. And if he knew you had this great power to power constructs, then he would become more forceful in opposing you in whatever. But he doesn't necessarily know that at the beginning. And I also like what you did there. You didn't make this guy the guy who has the ship full of golems. You let them be two separate people who kind of have this kind of life. And I love the first guy because he's like aloof and maybe seems like he is a little bit against you, but it's not. He just prefers to be surrounded by non-living, non-organic, non-human. He prefers the company of golems and constructs.
Right.
This guy is doing it because it's a puzzle and it's power. And those are two different guys.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a cool, juxtaposition there. Actually, regardless of that last hook, we talked about of them rising at his command, making him a major, whether you want to use it or not, I think it could be interesting. Also, like this kind of an aside from the ship thing, but could fall into that too, is maybe sometime prior to this person entering the picture, one of this guy's constructs probably was something denoting like, it has the sigil, this specific sigil. Maybe it has a CK in Elven script written on it, or something like
Calvin
that.
Klein.
Yeah, Calvin Klein. Yeah, just straight up rip. You just tear the Calvin Klein logo and just use it. May as well. But the CK, like Colin Kern, something that denotes that you are like in a dungeon across the continent, and you come across either this rampaging construct or it's trying to do something, or it's just destroyed and like you find the remains of it. I think that would be super interesting, like thinking ahead of that, of now they're coming into the city and they're interacting and it's like, oh, well, there's these constructs everywhere that people are using as like servants, or he has them as guards or whatever. And they all have this as well. That's going to start bringing up some like intrigue there of like, oh, do we tell him that we came across one of his, or now it's like, well, what was that thing doing? And I think you could play with that, and you could go with it had nefarious designs from him. It was on a mission for him because he's seeking power, or maybe he just lost control of it and it somehow got away and somebody stole it or somebody else was using. I think you can do a
Or
lot of stuff.
it was just one of his early ones that
Right.
was not nefarious or mean at all. It just kind of it was destroyed.
Right.
He's gotten better and better. He's figuring more and more out. The cool thing about all of these, and the thing I would say, all of you out there who are rising GMs, it's always maybe neat for you to like hear our ideas as jumping off points, but you can do whatever you want with these. You can like totally shape these two guys and like the idea of like finding this thing for the first guy. And then the second guy who is like doing everything he can to gain more power so that he can make advancements in construct making, whatever you want to do with that. And then marry these two together with what's happening in your main campaign. That's the cool part about being a GM. And if you don't feel like, oh, I'm just not that creative, you are. Sit down and just write what if, and then fill out a page or two of what ifs, and you'll find something worth playing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, I think us keeping to say that, like, we just want to spark idea, in this, and hopefully that's what's happening here. So, yeah.
All right, well, let's answer some Haversack questions. We had several that came in. I don't know if we're ready to answer all these or not, but we're gonna throw our best bet at it. And if we feel like we're not ready, we'll say, hey, we'll come back to that one. But what have we got in the Haversack, Adam?
Yeah, so this series of questions today are all from Evan Bright, and this is Haversack questions batch, quote, oops, all villains, end quote. So he says this. Hi guys, for Halloween, here's a bad guy themed batch of questions. So question number one, when you want to throw a big group of wimpy bad guys against a party, what's your go-to enemy type? I personally enjoy Goblin Raiders for being either life-threatening or embarrassing, depending on the circumstances. So you have like a go-to kind of group of minions or peons or whatever.
Did he say orcs?
He said Goblin Raiders. Okay.
I feel like orcs typically come up as the typical bad guy. If you're just like you're out and you need somebody right away, orcs. If it's low level, the wimpy bad guys, you can get those low as orcs, or you can like kind of build them up to be like orc champions if you need something a little more. But like when I know I just need an enemy, often orcs are the ones. I love the idea. I think we've mentioned on here in the past, sometimes I want to throw like a whole group of like really low powered bad guys just to be wiped out. I want my people to feel strong and able. Kobolds definitely can give that to you. And then low level orcs can give that to you. And I know there's things like skeletons and skeletons always make me think too much of like Halloween. Those little old Disney dancing ones that play xylophones on their ribs. That's what I always see, and so it never kind of gets to be my go-to. I almost always go to the orc first because that's a little more fantastical and not so cutesy in any sense, but can be easily wiped out if you make them low level, like super low level, or it can be a little heavier hitters if you need to. And you can even throw orc shamans in there. You can kind of get whatever flavor you want. Orcs are usually my go-to, and then I tailor it to what I need.
Yeah, I will say if you have like a cleric, I do enjoy tossing a bunch of skeletons in front of them and just seeing them like burn them, kind of thing like that.
That's true. That undead part.
You can get that spotlight kind of thing, but kobolds are my answer. I'm gonna slip something in here. I was gonna make a post on Instagram and I haven't got around to it, but I ran out of time. My mind went other places with the inspiration from people, but there is a podcast called Monster Man that I've listened to for many years now. And he started with AD&D, the Monster Manual, and just started going through A to Z, talking about the monsters. I highly recommend checking out Monster Man. One of the most beautiful parts of his podcast, honestly, as we're at 58 minutes right here, is that they're usually like 7 to 10 minutes. So they're easy to, so
grab. If you can't handle what we do every week,
there's him. Please continue to listen and tell all your friends. But that is a nice thing of like, hey, I'm gonna wash dishes for 10 minutes. I can listen to a Monster Man episode and hear some cool things about monsters. But he has a really cool way of talking about these things of like there are all these like little dudes, there's the goblins and there's kobolds, and you could use skeletons, you could use like little gnomish like fairy creature, like there's all, if you start looking through the book, there's a bunch of those kind of just minion type guys that are like have barely any hit points. You can just wipe them out. But they have different, or even if we get into orcs or like hobgoblins, there's like different feels to them if you kind of look at them. Like, and the thing about kobolds that I think I fell in love with, there's somebody wrote a thing about Tucker's kobolds, and basically they're more of like trying to pull like pranks on you than even, and like traps and like think through these things. They're not trying to like meet you head on. They want to just like make a fool out of you kind of thing. And versus like maybe a hobgoblin who's a little bit more strong, but they're more like militaristic and like in formation and have some like discipline to them, where the orcs are kind of jostling and like maybe fighting amongst themselves even more because they're just like a little more ferocious, typically the way we think of them a lot of times. I like the idea of those things. So I tend to go to kobolds because I like doing things like, I can't even remember if they were kobolds, but I was thinking about this when our group went down in my Jade Mask game. You were going down like into like a trash heap, and you had to fight these like trash monsters. And I never can say the name right, so I'm not even going to try, but it starts with an O. And they have all the tentacles and things coming up. Otiog. I'm going to go with that for now. I did say it anyway. You can correct me later, but you guys were fighting a couple of those down in this trash heap, but there were all these like kobolds that were just like watching it like it was like an arena fight and just throwing garbage at you guys. They weren't attacking you, but it was just like an extra kind of environmental thing. And so I don't know. I have a love for kobolds, even if they're not like actually supposed to be in a fight with people. They always make an appearance. So
I don't know if I was actually in that, but that was the first one I think you ran without me and Chris.
Okay. Maybe you guys missed that.
Because that does not sound familiar at all. But I think we started off the Dormant Mine. Started off with kobolds. You guys were running across a field filled with bear traps. And there was a bunch of kobolds there, and they had a bunch of healing potions you steal from them that were so weak because they had peat in them. And so they were not full strength. You guys were drinking these like horrible healing potions that had cobalt pee in them for like
my favorite part of that was not only were they weak, but every time I took one of those, I rolled like a 1 on the die. So it was like not even just like part of the story, but actually metagame. The dice that I'm rolling are like, no, this is not worthwhile. So
I made sure that happened. I controlled your dice in that situation.
So, short answer: kobolds,
kobolds and orcs.
Yep,
that's what we like. All right, what's our next one?
So the second question: how early do you come up with a big bad in their scheme? Before session 1, within the first few sessions, when the party reaches a world-saving power level? ? So when are we coming up with that kind of person in that, the BBEG?
I think a lot of this depends on who you are and how you run games. I will say this. I know that between Adam and I, Adam is much more likely to be like, hey, we have, a couple weeks, you want to rest, something like that. I'll run a one shot. And then those one shots typically end up turning into something that is more of a campaign. So I can't imagine that he's coming up with the big bad in that first thing that he thinks is going to be a one shot. Now I'll say we're different because like, I almost never do that. I almost never say, oh, I'll run a one shot. I'm always like, I'm going to think for 3 months in a solitude state of contemplation, like a monk, and come up with this epic campaign. And then I will unleash it on the world and run it for 7 years. And that kind of thing typically happens. Okay, 7 years might be an exaggeration, but not much. And I typically, when I'm doing mine, so I'll just talk about mine. I let Adam talk about his, but when I'm doing mine, I will typically like I said, start with a bunch of pictures and places and start to get an idea of a world. And I'll start to get a feel for it all at once. But as I'm doing that, I'm also thinking like, what is the big end guy? And I'll come up with a motivation for him. He has something he's trying to do. But I hold it loosely. I don't ever make it like they're going to get to this place and this is what that last battle is going to look like, because I know myself, and that is I love to veer with the changes. I love to flow with my characters as they go. And, what might have started off, I'm trying to, I don't want to give stuff away with Dormant Mind because that one's not finished, but I can tell you already that like how I had kind of envisioned the end at the beginning was one way, and it's changed, but the same, like his scheme is still his scheme. His major motivation is still his major motivation, but the way that's going to play out and the way that looks has completely changed 2 or 3 times. But I come up with it at the very beginning. I lay out, I know when they get to the end, they're going to be facing this in some way, but I allow that to change. And I know that sounds really vague because I don't want to give any of that away.
Yeah, that's the hard thing here.
But okay, so let's go back to the Oracle of Order, one I did before. I knew that they were going to end up in an insane mind at the end of this game, that the Emperor had gone insane, and the only way to change things was to go into his mind and fight inside this realm that didn't obey the normal rules of magic and the normal rules of physics and all of that. I knew that was going to be the end, and I even knew that there was going to be a drop of blood that was a combination of a blue and a gold dragon, the Blold, that was going to be instrumental in that. But there was so much along the way that went into that last battle. And as a matter of fact, the big bad guy at the end kind of ended up being his right-hand man who I knew would be there. It was Stondalus, the wizard.
Right.
He was actually... the Emperor had gone completely catatonic and insane, which he was going to be the kind of the bad guy that you had to get in his mind. Ended up he was catatonic and insane, and it was Stondalus that was there. But it was the same basic idea that I had at the beginning. So I came up with it at the beginning, and it morphed over time. But now, Adam, you who sometimes starts a one-shot that turns into a campaign, or sometimes starts a campaign that was from the beginning, how do you go about all this?
Yeah, I want to, before I answer that, I'm gonna mix podcasts for you, Matthew.
Okay.
I'm thinking about when you do your planning, the Aaron Rodgers Darkness Retreat.
That's what it could be like.
Go check out the Football Fandemic if you're into football.
That's right. I also run another podcast called the Football Fandemic, where we talk about football every week. If you can imagine a guy who's really into gaming and into football, I know those don't always go together, but they do here. And we did talk about this guy named Aaron Rodgers and his Darkness Retreats.
Yeah, so you have your game planning Darkness Retreat where you shut off everything and think.
I'm not going to lie. So when I was making, I think it was both the Oracle of Order and the Dormant Mind, both of those campaigns, my wife's family, all of her mom and dad and her sisters and their husbands, so the whole extended family, they like to go on these vacations where we go to a cabin for like a week and we do lots of stuff. Both of those birthed in those vacations, where there was interspersed times of being with family, but there was also lots of out walking in nature times and sitting in cabins, pondering. And I was like coming up with ideas. So those are my darkness retreats. I'm not saying being with my in-laws is a darkness. That's not what I'm saying.
Everything's quieter and more. Yeah.
Well, is it though?
Well, yeah. I think you kind of hit on it. Like part of it is that, so the Jade Masks came from like, hey, we're going to run like two of these sessions and then kind of be done. And then it was like, oh no, this is going to get bigger. But that works for me because I definitely do function in the, I've talked about this, but it's like peeling back the story kind of thing. And I do think, again, I talked about this a bunch, Matthew's talked about it, but like the way that my first experience with a game with Danny was like, okay, there's, this dude, Terrence, in the city who seems to be like kind of running things. And then, like, no, not actually, he's working for somebody who's working for somebody, kind of thing as the time went on. And I think that sometimes plays out for me in that way.
I have to think in our current campaign that you did not start with a big bad guy, and you may not have him yet. And
Yeah.
we're like lots of sessions in, because I know that the ley lines that now have become the central focus of this game were not even part of it when you started. It was only off of a prank, very player led. Did they even become a thing? Were they even mentioned? And then they became a thing, and then we all got interested, and it's kind of been building. I don't even know if you right now have the final guy in mind. Maybe you do.
Yeah. I've been, and this is, again, it's like, how much do you reveal in these moments with when you have
all of
players? But I will say that there have been multiple crossroads that I've just decided to lay out. In a lot of ways, it's not that the game has gotten away from me, but like I'm discovering a lot of ways, I'm discovering what's going on in this game particularly. And a big portion of that is, like, okay, this thing is a thing that wasn't even part of my plan to begin with, but now that's kind of a cool aspect. How can that connect in? There was a point where I remember I laid out kind of 3 rumor type or missions kind of deal in a city in Tifa's Edge for, Matthew, you like know where you're at there on the map, but and it was like kind of thinking like, what are they gonna do? What are they gonna choose to do? And if they do multiples, like what's gonna seem more interesting, kind of thing. And the ley line thing was like, it's like, okay, there's some of these lines that are failing, that needs to be fixed, was the thing you all grabbed onto. And that wasn't necessarily my, like, I want to push them towards that, but and maybe I did in an unconscious way, but like that was more of like, okay, are they going to go with that, or do they want to deal with this thing or this thing? And those other 2 things kind of like either got half dealt with or just kind of nobody really paid attention to. And I was like, well, I guess that's fine to let that fall. That's a big thing for me. I think previous games, maybe I would have wanted you guys to do everything. It's like, well, I laid this out, so I need them to complete all of the things, because that's how I like play like video games or other things. I'm a completionist.
Yes.
So it's like, but like to be able to say, okay, like they don't seem super interested, or just like the focus is went here, so let's let that stuff just kind of, it's still going on. It's still part of the world, but it's going to wither away. Now, let's follow this line of things. So I definitely am peeling it back as it goes right now, particularly.
I think that's a unique thing to think about too, all you GMs out there, as you're beginning and you're kind of getting into this. Think about your style, because I think we just hit the two kind of polar opposites. Adam is a peel the onion back and find the underlying what's next, and he's kind of letting it being guided. Whereas most of the time I start with if you're going to have prophecy as part of your end, then it's going to look different, because you can't lay out a bunch of lines of prophecy and then never tie them up. So when you are the kind of person who starts with the end in mind, or the kind of person who begins with an onion and starts peeling it back to find the end, that's going to kind of change when your big bad and the scheme and all of that comes into focus. Yeah. And both ways are fine. Both ways are good.
Yeah. One thing to tag on to that, there is a point where in my style, I do need to know, because that's I regret a thing I would do differently in like the very first campaign I ever did. Several things about the end I regret, and not in a like, oh man, like everybody hated each other by the end, but it was like, I just wish it could have been wrapped better and like more. It felt like a letdown to me, and I'm sure it did to everybody else too. But like, one of the things was
there was a great moment. We
was a great
we totally killed one of our own with a ball at Sphere of Annihilation, and everything was awesome.
Also, things as a GM that I wish I would have handled differently, So even though it's like a memory, but and it's kind of a funny one, but I feel like the big bad at the end in that one particularly, it's like you all had like history with these other people, and they had been a thing the whole time. And then we get to the end, and it's like, oh yeah, and there's this dude that's pulling the strings. I don't even know if you remember this like big wizard at the end who it's like, yeah, he's just a wizard who can be
Nope.
super powerful. And I didn't even run very well at the end. So it was like no threat. And there was no like real like connection
No real
to why
reason.
the only reason we're fighting this guy is because he was said to be in charge of these other people, and this is going to end it. But there had been no like seasoning of like, oh, here's like clues about him or anything. So that's like a thing I always look back at. I'm like, I wish that would have been different. So there definitely is a point where it's like, okay, start moving towards that. Don't just like toss a really powerful dude in at the end.
If you're the type of person who can't buy a gift for someone like in July or say September and then keep it from them until Christmas, you end up giving it to them early. This is the kind of thing you have to practice. You know who your bad guy's going to be, and you want to start dropping little clues. It's so much more satisfying to get to Christmas and have that reveal.
Yeah.
And I know it's easy to like, I'm so excited about this guy right now. I'm just going to put him out there right now.
Yeah.
Learn to wait. Learn to wait.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
All right, let's hit another one.
So Evan is asking with his third question. When it comes to running a big bad, so still talking about this kind of person, when it comes to running a big bad or their lieutenants, how morally complicated do you prefer to run them?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think that's going to depend.
Well, here's the thing. Yeah. I have typically, when you get to the big bad, he's bad. He's evil. He's dark. You know you want to kill him. Mm-hmm. And that can be very satisfying for PCs because there's no question. And most of my big bads have fallen to that category, even if I kind of make everybody else along the way. What happens is when I make them morally complicated, my players always tend to see the good in them. And then somehow there's redemption that happens along the way. I think it might be neat to come up with your big bad and mix in some moral gray, because like the world is not like someone who is all bad and someone who is all good very often. Maybe you can say that was like Adolf Hitler, all bad, but I haven't had a lot of these where it's like the moral complication at the end. And what do our players do with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I typically want them not to be dealing with a moral question by that point. Like I think for like trying to think if they have to have that conversation with themselves of like, is this person actually bad? I don't know if that loses something in that like victory moment at the end. Like I think that's why I typically am like, no, they're evil.
Could we have redeemed them? And
yeah.
Just didn't.
Yeah.
Well, I guess just go ahead and end them.
I'm trying to think I think typically that's my go-to is, by the time we're at this end, maybe there was some stuff earlier that like there were some questions about their motivations, but if we're coming to a head of like, this is now the end that we're finally meeting this person head on, like I'm kind of ready for them to just be like, yeah, we're going to throw down because this person is about to destroy the world, kind of thing. So
now, but Evan, you've given me some you've given me some thought because now my characters may start finding themselves seeing the good parts of some of the people who are the worst.
I'm playing with that a little bit. Of course, I don't know who the big bad is, like for sure, like who it is. It kind of depends on, again, the like where is the interest. But
I've already actually been doing this a little bit. I just remembered in my little what if pages.
I feel like we're both like in our brains now, like trying to think through this and not actually talking.
Here's
about
the problem: we're both currently running the campaigns we're thinking about, so neither one of us can really say much. It's like let's have a podcast where we don't say anything to people's questions.
Let's get really vague, but I do like to have some moral. What was actually the word there? Complication.
Ambiguity,
to work through that of of having people who it's like, these people are doing bad things, but for reasons that are kind of driving them. The thing I'm thinking of right now, which has been stated, so I'm not really saying anything that is like a huge bomb for anybody, but it's like there are drow that are doing bad things, but they keep saying what has been said so far is we're doing these bad things to like protect our homeland because our homeland's going to be overrun if we don't, kind of thing. So why would we not do this when we can protect ourselves? And so again, still evil things happening that we need to be stopped, but there is some complication. But yeah, so I'm thinking about that too now. It's like where could this go, if we went that way? Yeah, good question.
Yeah. Let's hit one more.
All right. Question 4. By appearance or abilities, what's one of the strangest monsters you've used against a party? This is an interesting one. I think recently, it's in my mind still, but there were these kind of like abomination creatures that were like these twisted people had mystically had been twisted in the city when the group had come back. And I think just like appearance, there was just like one, it was like 12 feet tall, had like a mushroom head, like fungus kind of thing. And it would shriek at people and cause like fear and like sonic damage. It was like a very just like odd, I had found a picture online, and that was one where the picture drove like what the creature did. So I remember, for me at least, that was like interesting. I don't know if that like stuck with everybody, but it was very strange to kind of like deal with, of like, what do we actually do with this thing, kind of, because it didn't have like really physical kind of hostility, but it was just this like weird sonic kind of psychic thing going on. So that was a weird one for me.
I don't know that I have an answer. I mean, I know that there's probably something. I'd have to go back and think about all of my campaigns. The thing that came to mind was when I just decided to take this person and for a time make it so that they were basically a reflection spell.
Oh,
and
yeah.
That was the Vorpal sword, right? You came in and Adam like said, I throw my sword at him, and he threw his sword and rolled a 20. But this guy, in my mind, already in my papers, anything that happened to him would be reflected back onto the person who did it. And so he rolled a 20 with a Vorpal sword, cut this guy's head off, and all of a sudden Adam's head just pops off and goes rolling across the floor. Not Adam, his character. We had to deal with that. And that was fun. That wasn't like a single spell that I saw anywhere. I decided this is the concept. When they step into this room, there's going to be a complete reflection of whatever happens. And so that was kind of strange. But I feel like that's not a very satisfying answer. I feel like there's probably something more. I'll think about this one and maybe come back to it in a later podcast. Be like, hey, I thought of a crazy one. This is for Evan's question.
Yeah,
like
I wanted to answer for you, but maybe it's not necessarily in your mind. But the weirdest thing I remember right now that you've run is the Eye King. That was like the big mass of stuff that wanted, I don't even know how to explain it, but that was in the swamp because there was a fight that took place with this thing that was kind of like, I don't know, not very it wasn't mobile at all. It was kind of this thing that was just like attached to all this stuff. And I feel like I'm not saying anything actually here, but that was an interesting one for me to like, all right, how do we deal with this, getting this item out of this thing when it's like sentient, but also a big glob of stuff. And that was really weird.
That's right. I forgot about him. Yeah. Or what about the girl that had the power of unmaking?
Yeah, unmaking.
You guys were like, cool. Had to be afraid of her, or the dude who was just a thumb. Just a big thumb. I guess there's been some odd ones. I have to have to go back and look at them all. Let's do our one last question. Right, we'll be done for today.
So any advice on how to run a seemingly friendly NPC turning traitor? I'd like to provide some clues. An NPC is up to no good without being super obvious.
Why don't you start with this one?
Yeah, the thing that came to mind when I read that was giving a tell or like a tick kind of thing. I think about like a tell, like playing poker. The guy always like takes his hat off and puts it back on when he's got a good hand. You kind of start noticing, and like I was thinking about that with this of some sort of nervous maybe tick that would start happening with this NPC. Maybe they're super sweaty all the time. Maybe they always pull on their earlobe when they're talking to you because there's like some sort of lie in there kind of thing, even though they're just talking. I think the mannerisms kind of thing, to me, if you overdo it, it's going to lead people pretty quickly. But that I think could be the thing of just like explaining some like weird tics that this NPC has suddenly, if it's like somebody who's been friendly to you and then now we know as a GM internally, this person's like turning on them, but they're really nervous to be around the group, then that's going to kind of show in some ways. So that's something I would maybe start thinking about.
Yeah. And you could even do like what the authors will typically do. And that is you think of what the picture of innocence and good is, and then the picture of evil. And you probably get a picture of like, I don't want to say blonde long hair. We don't want to say blonde is good, but you get this like open face, very kind of simple clothing. You think of someone bad, they're wearing dark, and there's maybe like a scowl, their hair's pulled back in a more severe thing, and just kind of slowly changing some of these appearance things as they go through the story. And it's totally superficial, but in people's minds, there's like some sort of transformation that starts to happen. If you're looking for like clues that are not obvious, but like definitely speak to something at an underlying level, just in your mind, think, okay, if this person is like evil and just betrayed them, what am I picturing? And then this person is like totally innocent and like good and simple. What am I picturing? And then just like slowly make those changes, not all at once. Just one time when you see them, they now have their hair pulled back, and it seems maybe at first like, okay. And then it's like a little more severe. And then like their clothes is like, they came in wearing a darker shade of green than usual. And then like pretty soon that turns to black, and like as this journey happens, just their outward appearance kind of changes. And then they see, boom, this happens. Sure. On the other hand, I like to like totally catch them off guard. They totally feel betrayed by this. No, I do think that though that appearance thing is so subtle that it does bring people's mind along, and all along they're like, oh my goodness, how could we have not seen this coming?
It's cool to have that build for sure.
But like those like little mannerisms, maybe they every once in a while they spit now, little things like that happen as they get further and further down that road of traitorism.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, I think that probably is good for today. Do send in your questions. Again, all of the Rise of the GM places. So go to Instagram, Rise of the GM. Go to X, it's Rise of the GM. If you want to send us a question in the haversack, it's riseofthegm@gmail.com. And do go to our website. Don't forget, Adam has posted an encounter kind of module there that you can take and run. It's free to download. That's Rise of the GM www.riseofthegm.com. You can go there and find that. So we're thankful that you could join us today, and we hope that module is good for you. We hope that you do check out our socials and do come back to join us next week. Anything, Adam, before we go that you want to say?
Looking forward to next week having a guest come on, Sam Grant, talking about the Sentinels Comics RPG.
Sentinels Comics RPG next week. If you don't know anything about Sentinels, be sure to join us and check out what that's about and who Sam is, because you'll enjoy that. So again, we're glad you could join us today, and we'll catch you all next time on Rise of the GM.
See y'all.